right, so here we go. This is our third book discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And so welcome
Fourth.
if you are
It's our
watching
fourth.
this. Oh, fourth.
Yeah.
Oh, what did we hit?
Clockwork Orange,
Yeah.
The Things They Carried,
Oh, yes.
Ragtime.
Ragtime.
So
Okay.
here we're like approaching halfway on our little project.
Wow. Yeah. So if you are watching this for the first time or returning, we are continuing to work on our presentation here as we go. But we did want to remind people that if you're wondering why we're having this book discussion, Alex and I are have basically challenged one another to reread books that we read in high school. So not necessarily books that were our favorite or that kind of thing, but we've put together a list. This all sprung out of a tag video that we did. And then we created a little challenge for ourselves with a report card. And we are now on our fourth book discussion. And I'll link both of those videos in the description box below if you want to go and see the two things that sort of got us to this point. And I'll also link all the previous the playlist basically that we have of all our previous discussions. Our goal is to discuss these and kind of put it out there for you guys to listen to almost podcast style. So we are both, booktubers. And so because of that, we do video format, but we're going to discuss it in a way like there's not a lot of things that we're showing. So hopefully this is something that whether you put it on a screen or just put it on your phone is easy for you to listen to as you're doing other things. This really is a discussion about the books more than it is a book review. So we're jumping straight into the heart of what these books are about. We're assuming that if you're watching or listening to this, that you've probably read it. And so we're not going to give a ton of background information or plot or that kind of thing. Specifically for the book we're talking about today, we are talking about the book and not the movie because there are differences. And I will include a link in the description box below to somebody who did a video on the differences between the book and the movie in case you need to clarify what happened in which one and what the focus of each was and that kind of thing.
And I think that will be a good refresher for a lot of people because I think especially this book, which we'll reveal in just a second, they live kind of in people's minds like one over the other, and it's hard to kind of separate what did I read and what did I watch in where people hold this story and in like a sentimental kind of way, I think.
I agree. And so I think if you haven't read the book recently, that it's especially important to make sure that you're separating the two. Should we share what we're talking about today?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah. So today we're talking about To Kill a Mockingbird. I have I feel like what was maybe the movie edition cover.
Yeah, probably. And I don't know when this one came. This says it's the modern classics version. So this is, yeah, I don't know when this cover came out, but I feel like I've seen this around for a while now.
I do too. Yeah, I feel like these are like the two most common covers for this, and the book being To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee.
Yep.
So yeah. So I guess a little background information. This is a winner of the Pulitzer Prize. It is the only full-length finished complete novel by Harper Lee, and we will get into
more on that later. Yeah.
We will get into why that needs to be stated. And the hardcover edition of this was originally published in 1961 and it's copyrighted 1960. So this book has been around in people's minds since the 1960s, and it was more or less so an instant success. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was my high school reread. This was a book that I read in my freshman year in high school, I'm assuming. It was either that or technically maybe 8th grade. But this book is about a woman named Scout, or at least as a child, that was the name she went by in her family, Scout Finch. And she is an adult at the start of this story, reflecting on how her older brother, broke his arm at one point in their childhood. And it is a coming of age story where she kind of takes us back to the beginning, if you will, of that experience and all the events that kind of led up to him breaking his arm. And we follow her for a couple of years as she takes us through this time in childhood where her eyes were really kind of opened and she started to become more of an adult and more aware of what was going on in her small town in in the South in Alabama.
So I know that this was not assigned to me in high school, but I feel like I must have read it either on my own or it was assigned in 8th grade, because I do have a vague memory of at some point reading it and thinking, okay, it was okay, but I didn't actually remember much of the book. In fact, like I knew character names. I knew there was an Atticus. I know there's a Scout, and the name Boo Radley was in my mind. But I forgot like who exactly Boo Radley was. Like so it was time for me to revisit this book. And so I knew that this book has a reputation of being like a classic in discussing racism, and like these, Atticus is upheld as this character who's a progressive, anti-racist kind of character. And so that's what I was looking for going in, is positive messaging coming out of like a deep South small community, along with that coming of age story, coming, from Scout's point of view. So yeah, that's my experiences. At some point I read this, and now here's what I'm hoping to get revisiting it.
Yeah. So kind of your experience and your expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think for me, similar to you, like I know for sure that my past experience with this book was in a school setting. Again, I don't remember if it was 8th or 9th grade. I want to say it was 9th grade, but I'm not going to die on that hill or anything. And my experience with this was that when we got to this book, that it was kind of like all the rage and everybody was like really surprised and shocked and interested in this book. And that my initial reaction to this book was discomfort, because I remember right off the bat thinking like, wow, there's a lot of racism in this book. And that the very initial response I got to bringing that up in class, both from the students and the teacher, was, well, it's kind of outdated and that was common at the time, so it's fine. And I was like, it's it's okay? Is that what we're saying? Like, so I just remember like feeling uneasy about that and feeling uneasy about the story the whole time. But as an adult, I don't recall why, other than some issues surrounding race.
Yeah, I remember the same thing, where I must have seen the movie at some point also, where I was remembering trial and thought that was like the main story, but could not remember the crime.
Yep. Yeah. Same. So what worked well for you? What did you like in the book? What favorites did you have?
Okay, so my favorite thing about this reading experience was definitely the way Harper Lee created a sense of place. I think on a like sentence level, I very much enjoyed her writing, and I think it was very effective in really putting me in was it Macomb, Alabama? like I felt like I was there with the kids walking down the sidewalk in the summer, and that I understood, for better or worse, the people that make up Macomb. So I think that was the highlight of the book for me, was the place writing, the really strong establishment of a setting, also in terms of like time and culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say for sure I enjoyed that. Like I didn't like where we were.
Right. That's for better or worse. Like
Right.
I felt like I
Right.
was there.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily think that Harper Lee wanted us to like where we were. I think she was
Mhm.
just like, this is just where we are. One of my favorite things and something that worked really well for me was also her characterization.
Mhm.
Um, I think she had some very strong, unique individuals in her story that also helped with that sense of place. Like, I had a really clear understanding, I felt like, of what Macomb was like. both as a town and as a county, including the people who lived in it. Again, didn't like the place, didn't like most of the people, but I understand where you have us and who lives there. And I was very impressed by that. And my favorite character after this reread ended up being Dill, who is Jim's best friend. He's a kid who comes and lives in town each summer because he gets sent to stay with an aunt of his by his mother on a regular basis. So every summer he comes to Macomb and just stays there for the summer, and he strikes up a friendship with Scout and Jim, and he's a pretty prominent sidekick throughout the entire book. And I really enjoyed him as a character. He brought a lot of fun into the book because he was just quirky in his own way. He kind of created a lot of mischief for them as well. And then later in the book, he was the character that I was most able to relate to. And interestingly enough, I did find out that he was based off of Truman Capote.
Yeah, I learned that this morning, and I was like, oh, I gotta bring that up. Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, because Harper Lee was basing a lot of this book off of her own childhood experiences and where she grew up in the South in general, and her friendship with her next door neighbor when she was a child, who would come and visit her and his aunt every summer, which was Truman Capote. And I was like, oh, what a strange, interesting world we live in. I think the reason that Dill ended up being my favorite wasn't just like the fun that he brought into the story early on in the book, but later in the book, as we understand like how racist this town is and the people in it, as the trial proceeds and we see how all that racism is coming out towards Tom Robinson, who's the person on trial, his character starts to be clarified. He starts to be the person who comes from outside the town, who's not part of that community, who is able to see things truly as they are.
Because what upsets him isn't even the more like overt racism. What gets him is like these subtle like nuances in the lawyer calling him boy, or just the way he's talking to him that Scout does not get because she's from there. This is how we talk. This is how we act. And so I 100% agree with you that what makes Dill's character so important is that he's bringing that outside perspective into this very like insulated small community mind setting.
Yeah, which I think is like a really important point in the book, because it made me reflect on the fact that everybody was like, well, the way that people are behaving in this book, yeah, is racist, but it's very common. Like everybody did it. But here you have somebody from outside this community saying, this isn't common. This isn't right. This is just these people. We should not be behaving this way. And why are you doing this? And I thought it was really insightful that even in that moment, you have somebody who, in today's terms, recognizes microaggressions. Obviously that like wasn't a term that existed at the time, but like you said, he recognizes like not that this guy is just being overtly racist, by calling him the N-word, but that he's doing little things that are dehumanizing Tom Robinson. In the book, Dill is playing the classic role of the court jester, the fool. He's the one who's like the silly character, and he's not part of the court, so he can say everything and get away with it. And he's frequently the one who has the most clarity, even more so than like the wise people and the King Atticus and that kind of thing. And I found him a very profound character by the end of the book, for sure.
We can even discuss, even more than Dill's reaction to Tom Robinson is how he reacts differently than Scout and Jem do to Boo Radley, who is the other like interesting kind of character in the book. And Dill has another approach to that. Boo Radley is kind of this shutaway that the Radley home is almost like this, like, I forget how Jem describes it. And he says something like, there's a haint in there. Like this house is like, no one touches it. No one talks to them. They're the foot washing Baptists that really, they don't go to church with everyone else, and so the community just kind of ignores them. They're there, no one talks about them. The kids kind of create these ghost stories around the house, but when Dill comes in, he becomes really obsessed with like, why doesn't anyone ever see Boo Radley? Why is he shut in there? Why doesn't he want to come out? And Dill is very interested and sympathizes with Boo Radley in a way that the people from there, or the kids anyway, Scout and Jem, certainly don't seem to. Like they've made a monster out of this secretive neighbor, where Dill brings in with him this kind of understanding that something's going on with him. Like,
Yeah. And it's not just the kids, because I mean Dill's the one who's kind of willing to question it a bit more, like you were saying, and even question the adults. And even the adults are kind of like, well, what they do, that's their business. And therefore we're not going to question the fact that we we all in this community know that this family is keeping a human being locked up inside their house, and that he's not even seeing the light of day.
mhm.
And we're going to assume that their reasons for doing that are their reasons, and we're not going to question it. And Dill is kind of the first person who questions it. He's like, should he be in there? Do we know he's even in there? Like, what?
He's the one to say like he must be like lonely, like there must be something going on with him, and Dill's bringing that outsider perspective, right? Like he's not, like, this isn't just the norm to him. Also, his character is one, like, just the fact that he gets sent away every summer, and then there's like a weird thing going on with him like talking up his father. There's a scene where like he's run away, and like, so you could tell like there's something going on with Dill also, where he doesn't have a stable family like base, like he's bounced around and kind of, so just that level of understanding in a child so young adds like a real depth to his character. He's definitely wise beyond his years.
Yes, for sure. Let's move into the things that we didn't like, or weren't our favorite, or that we felt like didn't work well in the book.
Okay, and my least favorite thing, I feel like, is going to be very controversial, um, because there's a very unique narration style, which I think is endearing to a lot of people. A lot of readers, remember this as the coming of age story, which it is. And there's a lot of excuse made for the racism and the language because we're hearing from a child. This is a child's point of view. I did not like the narrator, who was the narrator of the book, like who Harper Lee chose to frame this story. Because I could not get around the fact that the narrator is not actually a child. It's an adult telling the story of her childhood. And for me, there was a disconnect there because it was written in a very childish manner, in which there was not a lot of reflection, or like awareness of like reflection. And there were certain things like, so Scout's mother has passed away while she was very young and has no memory of her. And the way Scout describes that, like right at the very beginning of the book, is to say, I was too young, I don't remember her. My brother feels things. There's no like understanding that you would think, even if she doesn't as a child understand what the absence of a mother kind of does to their family dynamic, an adult telling back the story on the childhood would have some understanding of like, this is why things were the way they were. This is why my father took a certain approach to parenting, why I was behaving in a certain way, why my brother would sometimes, miss her influence. But we get none of that. And that's just like a very specific example of like where this narration style started like missing for me. Because like from that point on, I would keep coming across things saying like, as an adult telling us this story from your childhood, there should be a much bigger awareness, and I just wasn't getting it.
And I know when we were talking about this, we were comparing it to another story that is narrated by an adult looking back on their childhood, and that was A Christmas Story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty well-known movie, interestingly, even though it's based on a book, a selection of stories. And that one, like, I think one of the things that if people have seen that movie, what they recall from the movie, in addition to some of the famous scenes, are the narrative voice, which
Mhm.
is like an adult man. And in that book and in that movie, you see like the distinction. You get the self reflection. He curses as a child, he says swear words as a child, but as an adult looking back at it, he self edits it. And so he doesn't tell us the word he said as a child, he alludes to it, fudge.
Yeah. And then he tells you, like, I didn't say fudge, I said the big one. He's definitely very effective of like the action of each story presents the childish nature and like the child's perspective, but the framing and the narrator very effectively kind of wraps it up so that there's reflection and there's understanding that as a kid I thought this, but actually here's what's going on. And Scout is observing Jem gain this awareness of Atticus and this appreciation of Atticus and an understanding of the father, but Scout doesn't. And which also made me wonder, like, so why is Scout the one telling the story if she can't make the connections that are happening? And the adult narrator giving us this story as an example of an important moment in their childhood also doesn't wrap it up and say, like, I didn't get it, but Jem got it. Like, you really have to read between lines and like figure out what lessons being learned in an example like that. And the author's not doing that, or the narrator's not doing that. And so that unreliable narrator, it's not effective in a way that other characters, like in other examples of literature, do. The other example I had thought of was Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry Finn is also more effective at like giving you like this understanding of like, here I was not knowing what was happening in a moment, but with like a little bit of distance, like you're able to kind of grasp like the bigger picture better than I think Scout does for us. Like maybe that's like a personal issue I have, because this isn't the only book I feel that way about. Like there's times I go to book club and people love this book. I'm like, but the narrator made no sense. Like who was telling the story and from what time they were telling it makes no sense. And then I can't let go of that. So that was my biggest disappointment in this book.
But I do think it's an important thing in this book because, like you said, if our big reason for to be like more explicit, like if our big reason for excusing the fact that the N word occurs in this book um, almost 50 times, so every couple of pages, if our big reason for excusing that is that our narrator is a child and she doesn't know any better, then what do you do with that once you realize our narrator isn't only a child? She's retelling this as an adult and she's choosing to leave that in there. She's not self-editing like Ralphie did. She didn't change it into, nudge. She
Mhm.
didn't say, well, I didn't say N blank. I said the whole word.
Mhm.
And if we know that as an adult she could have done that, like, what do we do with that information? Because at that point, that's an author's choice to leave that in there repeatedly.
Right. Or like even if, yeah, as an adult narrator, the word is staying in, there's no nuance to like how impactful the word is. Which
Yeah,
you think
it's
like with the theme of the story, that would be an important message that wants to get brought up too. But no, it's just dropped. Like,
yeah, yeah. Which I guess is a nice segue
yeah.
into my least favorite things
Mhm.
in the book, or something that I didn't think worked well. And for me, that would be the messaging in the story. I think that's actually another really popular part of this book is, I don't want to dismiss the fact that at the time this was written in the 1960s, this book was very helpful in the civil rights movement. I don't think that means that we have to say that it was perfect or well done. And I don't think the messaging in the book was. I think really that this messaging was powerful in the 1960s is really more a reflection on just how bad things were in the 1960s, because I think a lot of the messaging and themes in this book are really weak and like really like milk toast. And I think we're even milk toast, I'm going to say it, in the 1960s. But like, relatively speaking, you know, milk toast back then must have been like the best crisp bread ever.
Yeah.
But I think it's okay to acknowledge that, like, 40, 50 years later, like, it's not good enough anymore and should not be held up as some. And so if I take, for example, what we were talking about with Scout using the N word like over and over and over again, like excessively, like I swear she says it more than all of her neighbors combined. What is not addressed for hundreds of pages is her constant use of it, even though it seems like her father doesn't use the word, but we don't know. But I think my bigger issue with it was what he says to her about why she shouldn't use the word, or like her use of the word.
Says, "You aren't really an N-word lover, then are you?" And he says, "I certainly am. I do my best to love everybody. I'm hard put sometimes. Baby, it's never an insult to be called what somebody thinks is a bad name. It just shows you how poor that person is. It doesn't hurt you. So don't let Mrs. DuBose get you down. She has enough troubles of her own."
Yeah. So I feel like you have those two different situations. So the first time it's mentioned, he he's just like, well, don't say it, because the issue with saying the N word in general is that it's just common. Like, it's slang. Like, not that there's anything wrong or racist with saying it. It's just a common, like, almost like it's a common, like, white trash term.
Right.
And that
And
gets back into the classism.
that was my takeaway. It was like, don't say it because it's racist. Don't say it because we're better than that.
Right. Right. But not like morally better. We're like financially better than that. Like,
Yeah, like the Finches are an established family of long standing,
right. And
for
so
whatever
we,
that means.
yeah, and we speak properly. And then when I think you add that to the second scenario where he's being called an N lover, and then there was that passage that you read that he said, like, his response there boils down to the, yeah, I take that, I take it in pride, kind of a sticks and stones lesson about it. And, don't worry about it. Don't think about it. And, this says more about the other person than it says about us.
Mhm.
But he doesn't say, like, we're not going to say that because it's racist, it's demeaning to these other people, or any of that, despite the fact that Atticus was the person who, with his brother, was like, Scout can take it. You need to be explicit with her, explain things to her. He doesn't explain racism because
Mhm.
maybe he doesn't see it as an issue. Like, people might as well have been calling him stupid, and his response to her would have been, well, don't worry about if people call me stupid. That says more about them than it does about me. And that's all the lesson we need to learn from that. Moving on.
Meanwhile, his son has had like a little breakdown. Like he snapped and like violently attacked this woman's like shrubbery.
Right. For calling the father this.
Right. And not because of the N word, but because of what it meant about his father. So there's that disconnect, like not because she's being racist, but because she's suggesting his father be lower than he is.
Right.
Um, but like there's real emotional damage being done to his children. And like Atticus is not so much acknowledging of that.
Right. 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 Because this is another moment where I'm like, I'm not okay with the message we're sending here, because what you're referring to is one of their neighbors who is basically like cursing out their father and talking about how he's an in lover, and like saying all these very hateful racist things to Atticus's children.
Mhm. And she was just very obviously enjoying the reaction from the children, which makes
Right.
adds a whole nother like level of monster to her character. She loved antagonizing these children.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, like you said, as a response, Jim like gets super frustrated one day, ruins her garden. And then he gets punished by Atticus because he's like, she's sick. And so then the children have to go over and read to her every day. And out of that comes this whole message of like how we have to put each other in somebody else's shoes. So they have to go over to her house, read to her, and stay with her for a couple hours each day. She starts every single session out by just saying a slew of racist things to the kids. Like, that is the whole beginning of their session because, like you said, she enjoys antagonizing them. She knows it makes them uncomfortable. She's talking to them negatively about their father, this, that, and the other thing.
And if that
And
doesn't get to them, she throws in their dead mother. Like, she
right.
really wants to needle these kids.
Yes. And then what is the message that we get about this in the end? Because Atticus eventually like finds out some of this or whatever, and they eventually stop having to help this woman who we do find out is dying. Like, she has some sickness, she's dying from it. But in the midst of, having to deal with her own pain, she has become addicted to her pain medication. And her sort of dying wish is to get off this pain medication. So the reason the children are there reading to her is to distract her from her symptoms of withdrawal so that she can die drug free. And so Atticus's message to his children, who are basically traumatized by this experience, is put yourself in her shoes. Like, she really wanted to die free of this medication and to die not addicted to this drug. Not that she had to, that was just her own personal desire. And you guys were part of helping her do that. And she's a true hero. She may
Yeah.
have traumatized you, she may have died full of hate and racism, but she wasn't addicted to the pain medication.
The lesson was definitely like, you don't know what other people are dealing with, so don't worry about the things they say. Or like, she's still our neighbor, so even if you don't agree with her, like, just let
Yeah,
it roll off you. And
just
so
cope with it. It's okay.
at the
Move
top of this
on.
at the top of this conversation is where I message, like, there's a theme of acceptance.
Mhm.
And it's not, like, to me, it's not what I thought it was, because this is just one example with this neighbor character. And Atticus just always tells the kid, like, well, still our friend, still our neighbor. Like, sure, they wanted to attack me for, they joined a potential lynch mob and were willing to take me out to get to the prisoner, but they're still our friend and neighbor. Like, we just have a difference of
You
opinion. You have to accept the people here because
What
they're
else could we do? Like, move?
yes.
Uh, right. You're a lawyer. You already go to somewhere else for work. You could move to that somewhere else.
Well,
But
and yet
yes,
he had moved somewhere else and came back to raise his children here.
right, right. And he even has a point where, like, one of his messages, he literally just says is about coping. Like, just, so it's really just a like, well, part of living around racist, hateful, sometimes evil neighbors who are willing to, watch other people die, torture children, and etc., is you just learn to cope with it over time. And, you accept very small, microscopic baby steps that may be in the right direction, and the rest you just deal with because they're our friends. And I'm like,
He wanted his kids to see where they live for what it is and then just accept it. Don't expect any change. So that's where I'm like, what's the deal with this messaging?
yeah. With Atticus, I feel like he's often built up as the hero of the story because he's like the guy who's coming in, who is willing to fight for justice for, against the racist town and take on the case of this black man and do the right thing. Whereas in the book, that's not the reality. We are told, and he tells us, he had to take this case. It was given to him by the judge. Sure, the judge gave it to him because the judge was like, I think you're the only person who would take it and do it
Yeah.
well.
If anyone can do it, you can. Yeah.
Yep. Atticus admits that this is the type of case he never wanted to try. He's reluctant to do it, and that his main motivation for doing it is basically that he has a lot of self pride and he believes that if you're going to do something, you should do things well. So, what's missing from all of that? Tom Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's not taking this case for racial reasons. He's not taking this case for the sake of Tom Robinson. He's taking it for himself and his own reasons.
Yeah. Well, he also
Um,
says things like, I couldn't go to church, and I couldn't have my children look me in the eye if I didn't take this case. And I feel like it's very easy to read that as because of the way this is an injustice against a black man. And I think that's the popular read in that. by the time we get to the end of the book, and then in the book we read further, I think it's actually obvious that his moral kind of stance with this case is because he values truth so much. So he knows somewhere there's a lie, and that's where he has to defend truth, or he can't sleep at night, can't look his children in the eye, can't be in church the next day.
Yeah, and he says that. He says that. Like that.
Yeah, like I don't think Atticus is actually the progressive anti-racist.
Yeah,
And
I would say if you really follow the characterization of Atticus Finch, he's really an anti-hero here. Like where he's the reluctant hero.
mm-hmm.
He is doing the right thing, and he admits this, like because he's forced to do the right thing. Like he uses all of his ability when somebody forces him to use all his ability. That is the type of person he's characterized as, because it comes up even in the dog scene where like they find out he's a marksman. He admits like, oh, I'd never do that. I'm really good, but I only, use the best of my abilities when somebody forces me to. And like I said, I'm amazed that this helped people move forward anywhere. But I think it's really, a sign of where they were, not that it was great messaging. Like I don't think it's, and I certainly don't think it's messaging that holds up to today.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit more about Atticus and like the legacy of Atticus and the popular opinion of Atticus. His motivating factor is his love of the law. And
I think you even see that with like how he relates to the Radley family.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
he's not concerned about the health of and well-being of their family or what's going on there, or with the poorer people in his area, who he also calls white trash.
I feel like the title of the book itself is a dead giveaway that Atticus does not think people are all equal, that the races are equal. And in effect, that is a racist thinking. So To Kill a Mockingbird, the reference within the story is that Atticus says to kill a mockingbird is the greatest sin because mockingbirds don't cause any harm. All they do is make music. They don't hurt anybody. So it would be a crime to harm one.
Yeah, they're just there for our entertainment and enjoyment.
Yeah. In the scene in which Atticus shoots a rabid dog, which I liked that chapter for like the way the children are enlightened and like learn more about their father. However, after the kids learn that their dad used to be known as One Shot Atticus, and he was like an excellent marksman, the neighbor? I think Miss Maudie is telling them like, oh yeah, Atticus could shoot anything. Like he was amazing. They called him One Shot Atticus, but he realized that this was a God-given talent that put him at an unfair advantage. And so he vowed not to kill anymore. She says, if your father's anything, he's civilized in his heart. Marksmanship's a gift of God, a talent. Oh, you have to practice to make it perfect, but shooting's different from playing the piano or the like. I think maybe he put his gun down when he realized that God had given him an unfair advantage over most living things. I guess he decided he wouldn't shoot till he had to, and he had to today. But that line about God giving an unfair advantage over things, I think given the context of the book, you can now turn around and apply that to this idea of one race being above the other. That's just how the place that God put the races in. And then in the, like further, not really the end, I think towards the end of the trial, Scout's talking to somebody and she says, Atticus says that it's 10 times worse to cheat. I think she uses the term Negro at that point. She says it's 10 times worse to cheat a Negro than it is to cheat a white man. And they're like, yep, Atticus is absolutely right. I feel like all three examples really show where he does think there's a disparity of the races. And inherently, if someone thinks that way, they're racist themselves. So even if he's not acting in a harmful way outright, he still has these beliefs. And to me, like, I feel like that's what's missed in the characterization of Atticus by, I think, the general like readership takeaway. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a really complicated issue because I think we want to like him, and he is situated in the story as a hero, but I think we have to really evaluate, is he actually the hero that, especially the hero that popular culture has made him into be? I mean, I think for sure there are parallels between his behavior with the dog and his behavior with the trial. Like in both of them, he is forced to do something that he'd really rather not do. He's trying to be super humble Atticus. He doesn't want to take on these things. I think he sees himself as having an advantage as a marksmanship as well as an advantage as a lawyer, which
Mhm.
I'm like, if you think you're that great a lawyer that you could take advantage of other people, like, wouldn't that mean you'd be winning more trials and shouldn't you be putting all that effort in? I don't know. I didn't totally understand how that parallel was supposed to make sense, but
Uh-huh.
there are parallels there. And and so it's almost like he's going to take this God-given talent he has as a lawyer and finally, because he's forced to use it in court. And I'm like, but what does that say about you as a person
Mhm.
if you're not going to do this until you're forced to? And same thing like with Boo Radley. He's not going to defend and do the right thing for Boo Radley until he's forced to by the sheriff.
Yeah.
Like he was going to kind of do the right thing and help Boo Radley out. But like you said, by like being willing to subvert the truth and condemn his own son for the sake of justice. It's weird. It's
Yeah.
just
I just feel like throughout it, like, and I think because we were checking in on Voxer as we were reading, where I was like, there keeps being this like almost moment where I'm like, yes, Atticus, I really like what you said. Oh, like kind of drop the ball there. And I feel like each scene, like those three that specifically that I pointed out, there's like a symbolism or like there's a message that's not directly on the page, but you can kind of pull back to like the book overall. And yeah, that's where I'm like, something is missing.
right. There's something that's
Like
like
there's something that's not
unclear about
being
him.
said. And that's what I can't kind of separate, like what you're actually saying and what you're leaving unsaid
Mhm.
are like where I'm having this disconnect with what the message or moral of the book overall is.
One example that comes to mind is during the court situation where like Atticus um, is talking with somebody, or maybe it's when he's outside the jail defending Tom Robinson. But at some point, he says a line that's something along the lines of, "Do you really think so?" And Scout kind of breaks the storytelling to have a flashback and share with us, the readers, that whenever Atticus says that line,
Mhm.
like he was just about to like jump on somebody and prove them wrong.
Yeah, that's his gotcha line.
Right. And one of the examples she gives is like how this came up, would come up with Jim, where Jim would be, saying something about sharing his thoughts about, um, what happened in the Civil War and what should and shouldn't be happening in the South and the North now. And Atticus will be like, "Oh, is that really what you think?" And then she talks about how Jim would then have to spend the rest of the night reading this one particular person's essays, and then she moves on. Well, I looked up the name of the person that she mentioned, and I will link this in the description box below. And the person that she mentioned was somebody who largely was very popular for going around and speaking about how after the Civil War, um, the South really needed to diversify its industrialization. Okay, that
Mhm.
that makes sense. Seems wise. But the guy, as part of that messaging, wanted to do that to keep the white population supreme. Like he was a white supremacist. And so when you know the full extent of what this guy preached and what his essays are on, again, it kind of muddles the water. And you're like, oh, okay, so what was Atticus saying?
Right.
And
Why is he
recommending.
sending homework?
Right. So you're just left with this, like, what am I supposed to make of the fact that he was reading these essays? And I think there's a lot of unclear moments like that, particularly with Atticus.
Yeah.
I guess we'll move on to this book in a high school setting.
Mhm.
Um, why do we think this is taught, and do we think it's still appropriate for a high school setting? And yeah.
Um, I think it is taught to kind of fill that space in terms of like assigning a book that discusses social justice. Um, and I think it continues to be taught more out of like uh, the consideration of it as a classic in like social justice and kind of teaching a lesson regarding racism, um, and whether or not I think that's appropriate to continue teaching it in that space. Yeah, I don't think that we should continue, but I think that's what lands it in the classroom.
Okay. Yeah, I think I in my personal experience, I feel like it was taught as like more historical fiction in terms of wanting to look at like early American, both early American literature and earlier American history. So I feel like it's frequently taught in like a high school American lit class. And I feel like it's taught because it's like, okay, this can place us in a certain time period in the US, both historically and both in literature writing. And it was a Pulitzer Prize winner. And it talks about, coming of age. And, as a young adult novel, and as a book being taught in school, hits a lot of the literary elements, right, that you want to teach and that kind of thing. And I don't think this is the best choice for high school. And the reason I say that, even though I know it's going to be a super unpopular opinion, is because for a book that talks significantly about how important it is to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, I don't think this author or people who assign this book put themselves in the shoes of African American students having to read this book. And I cannot, as an African American, express what it feels like to read a derogatory term over and over and over and over again, particularly in a classroom setting. So that would be where I land on that.
Yeah, and that there was an opinion piece that I shared the link with you, and I think you had found it yourself also. That was basically like, can we stop pretending like this is a progressive book that needs to be included in curriculum? And there's a portion of it that says, why, oh, why are we still requiring this book in school? The paternalistic message may have been progressive 55 years ago, but it isn't now. And when I ask 8th and 9th grade English teachers about the choice, they're shocked at my insensitivity. Sometimes they assure me that they teach the book as a historical text and that they do, in fact, talk about the outdated nature of Atticus's views. I assume what they say is true. But I'm going to guess that what 8th graders remember is the powerful story itself, not the teacher's explanation of historical context. Most readers see Atticus Finch as a true hero. If they didn't, they understood Atticus Finch to be paternalistic. And then it says they wouldn't have been so surprised to find out more about him in Go Set a Watchman, which is another discussion.
Coming up.
Yeah, we'll get there. But yeah, basically saying that, like, yeah, teachers are going to tell you, like, oh, we're teaching this as historical. But, like, it's time in the classroom, I think, has come and gone.
It changes the conversation that you're having. It's like your conversation in your English class really supposed to be about outdated literature.
Yeah.
Is that really the topic that you're broaching? Like,
I think we talked about this even back in our first video on A Clockwork Orange, and like, should it be in classrooms? And we discussed how there is definitely a way to say, like, this book exists and here's what it does, and here's the reception, and here's its intent, and here's the takeaways, without having to actually teach the book and actually read it in a classroom setting. There's like a discussion of genre, a discussion of impact of like culture, and say, like, here's this book's place in, in the history of literature.
And we're well aware that a lot of people will disagree with us on this and will be like, well, are we supposed to remove every book that makes somebody feel uncomfortable and da da da? No, that's not what we're getting at. However, again, if you totally support this book, then you support the message of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And so I think in this particular case, that needs to be taken into consideration because it's not just one person's shoes.
Right.
Like
right. And we're not saying don't read it. Like,
right.
Read it. Absolutely. Like, read it and be part of that conversation. Like, make your own opinions for it. Like, we're not saying this book should be like banned or whatever. But in terms of a classroom setting, I think it's time to move on to something better.
So, shall we get into our ratings?
Yeah.
I feel like our ratings are probably pretty obvious, but maybe not. So, yeah, so let's hold them up.
Okay.
Ooh.
Okay.
Oh, so yeah, so we were pretty similar. And in fact, I think we're exactly the same. I gave it 3 out of 5.
I gave it a 3 out of 5, which was a 60.
So is a
I
60 a
think that
D
was
or a F? I'll have to look at our report card. But
okay.
whatever it is, okay, we gave it the same grade. I'll
Yeah.
correct on the screen what letter grade that is based on our report card.
Okay. Yeah. One of
Yeah. So, but either way, like,
and again, so and that's my personal reading experience in
mhm,
terms of grading it as a classroom. That I'm probably in the F range. Like I'd
mhm,
rather not see this continue to be taught in a
mhm,
classroom.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think by the time for like, if you're going to acknowledge the book is out of date, that this person's wrong, that we don't hold these values and these views, this, that, and the other thing, like at some point I'm going to go, why are we reading this then?
Mhm.
So if you have reasons that you think this still makes sense to teach in a classroom, please share that in the comments, because I'm sure there are reasons that people have, despite having to include all these caveats, and even just being like, I don't know what else to teach, maybe a reason, that
Mhm.
people have. So speaking of reading other things and not reading this, yeah, further reading.
Okay. Well, this brought me right into wanting to read another book by Harper Lee, which I swore I would never read because To Kill a Mockingbird didn't hold space in my memory as I knew I read it at some point, couldn't remember it. I didn't have that emotional attachment to it that other people have, and either got them excited or then immediately disappointed by Go Set a Watchman. But over the course of reading To Kill a Mockingbird, I was like, it has to be done. Um, I think you wanted to read it first, and I was like, okay, yeah, we'll do it.
Yeah. And this is like taking everything controversial we just said and adding a whole nother controversy on top of it. Um, because I feel like this book is even more controversial than To Kill a Mockingbird. Um, And I guess just as a quick background to the controversy of Go Set a Watchman, if you don't know, is there are a ton of like conflicting opinions about whether this book should be published, shouldn't have been published, whether Harper Lee wanted it published, what place it has, da da da. I
I
will
think there was
include,
discussions of like elder abuse and everything in this book being published.
yeah.
Like there was a lot
So
of drama behind
yeah.
this thing.
So I will include the link to the Wikipedia page, as well as links to articles that just talk about the facts, not about the rumors and opinions, because I think that's where a lot of this gets confused. But in summary, here are just the basic facts that I found in brief about what this book actually is, despite all the drama that came with the publication of it. One, just because you mentioned the elder abuse, that did go to court, it was investigated, no elder abuse was found. So I think that needs to be put out there. Um, in regards to this book, at the end of the day, this book was legally signed off by Harper Lee to be given to a publisher. Um, it did go to publication. Things got questionable during the publication, but even if you read the back of the book about the author and the back page here, it does explain in the book by the publisher itself that this book is the original draft of To Kill a Mockingbird. It is not the prequel, it is not a sequel, it is not book point 5 or 1.5 or whatever. Um, and on the back, you will see that it says Harper Lee's second novel. Go Set a Watchman was technically the second novel that Harper Lee attempted to write. It was published as To Kill a Mockingbird. And I think that's where all the confusion comes in. She did agree to release to the publisher this draft of the book.
Mhm.
Um, and then they released it with a lot of confusion. There are some conflicting views. You can read in the articles that I include what her friends thought and didn't think, but that's kind of the notorious background of this book. So we both went into this book reading it as a initial draft of To Kill a Mockingbird, understanding that Harper Lee herself was a huge fan of editing and editing and editing work and books before being published. And so this is like her final version of this book.
Yeah.
And
we
for
went into
me,
this knowing that like in the reader sphere, everyone loves this book. And so everyone hated this book. And we were like, well, we have issues with this book. Maybe this will make things more clear. Knowing that it's not a sequel, it's not a prequel. I kept referring to it as like alternate universe, like Mockingbird, like the Mockingbird that could have been. So like, yeah, we went into this knowing that there was a lot of disappointment, that there was a lot of anger around this story because people held such like strong like opinions or positive opinions about the characters in this book.
did you find that to Go Set a Watchman clarified anything for you?
I think it confirmed suspicions I had about characters in this book, where, like I said, I don't read Atticus as completely progressive and anti-racist in this book. And this confirmed that for me. I think it made him more clear. And then also because Scout is an adult in this book, I liked the narration better. So it helps me with her character as well. So that's where I ended up like, yeah. I think it did help me with this book.
Yeah, I found it helped me in a lot of the same ways. Like I found in Go Set a Watchman, like he said, in here, Scout is like clearly an adult. She is a character in the book as well as the narrator as an adult, and she is very clearly having flashbacks. And I did find out that one of the editing decisions that was made and continuing to edit it to get it into this format was that her editor, when she first sent her this manuscript or him this manuscript, said that his favorite part of this book was the flashbacks with Scout as a child. And that was kept. And I mean, kept as in like, there are like word for word things that are lifted out of this book and put in here. And I think the parts that were lifted directly out of this book just weren't well integrated. That's how I personally feel about how that worked out. And then I also felt like there was a bit more clarity that happened with Atticus, where in this novel, like she does get a lot deeper into the fact, and like Atticus says very directly, like, I'm all about justice. And Scout accuses him about being all about justice and truth over even like humanity and people's like humanity. And she doesn't explicitly say that in here, but a lot of the ways that's characterized in this book are still characterized in this book very similarly. So it was helpful to have it more explicitly stated here. I don't think Atticus in this book is a different Atticus in this book. I feel like he is very much the same person. I think she just this book is much more direct on a lot of the topics. It's a lot more explicit. I think in here it's a lot more subtle. It's a lot more approachable, and maybe sometimes even gets lost. And it also helped to know that Harper Lee said she did not intend this book to be an indictment on her community. She wanted it to be a plea to them. She never said what the plea was, but she was asking something of them. She was pleading with them. And I want to say maybe pleading with them to continue to make small steps and to be kind to one another. I don't know. Again, the messaging in this book, not a fan of. And so to me, that explained how you went from this to this. Is that like she maybe in editing realized she needed to soften her approach from this book? Because this book feels like an indictment, and so, that wasn't what she wanted.
Something I heard today in a podcast regarding both of these books was that Atticus is based on Harper Lee's father, who was a segregationist. And over the course of writing, so by the time this turns into this, he's changed his views. And so I think that's where Harper Lee also softens her character, and we get the Atticus of Mockingbird instead of Atticus of Watchman. So I think, like you were saying, in terms of like, we don't want this to be an indictment of the town. This book is very harsh, especially in Scout's reactions to learning the way people think and her father thinks. And in this one, I think because it's the child just kind of reacting to the place, it is a lot easier to digest. And I guess it's not as aggressive. And so like you can see how, you know, it's not a series, it's not a duology. It's this book became the other book.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think you have to read them as a direct correlation. I don't think you need to say, like, well, in Go Set a Watchman, she wanted Atticus to be a segregationist, and therefore in To Kill a Mockingbird, he still is one. Like, but I also don't think it's a she wanted this and now he's no longer that. I think it's just, you know, you kind of have to, it really just could be appreciated as like, this is where she started, and you're really just looking at her editing process. I mean, you're missing all of the in between steps.
Yeah.
You know, so it's hard to say what her intent from the first product to the end product was, but that's realistically, you know, what we're looking at. And I know there's also been discussions surrounding these two books as to whether or not this book was actually written by Harper Lee. That has been looked into, and as far as they can tell, yes, it has. There's no question about that. There's too many parts of this that are lifted, like word for word, into this book. Even I caught that. They did find a lot of evidence to suggest that Harper Lee had a lot of help in the writing the opening of this book by Truman Capote. They were like, there's a lot in the beginning of this book that is very similar to how he opens his book. And knowing that they had a really close relationship for quite a while in their life, that makes sense. It's kind of what I got out of Go Set a Watchman.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had anything else.
No, so just, yeah, it fixed the problem with the narrator I was having. It didn't ruin characters for me. I will say the ending fell flat for me. I think in both, what's obvious is that the place is so important to Harper Lee, and there's a lot of nostalgia in that where Scout is actually in this book, she's coming back from New York, and so she feels like she doesn't fit in to her home anymore, and she feels a lot of resentment for that. She definitely feels like a fish out of water, that like there's no place for her. But in the end, she loves this place. And this is where you kind of get the like, okay, I'm being too harsh. Like she has a very strong reaction to learning that her father is in this group of people who, you know, want to keep segregated. They're like the anti-civil rights. He takes a case just to keep it out of the hands of the NAACP so that they can't force change upon them. They're very much like Scout herself is very like states' rights. Like, how dare the federal government tell us what we're supposed to do? But then even that, she walks it back and she's like, well, yeah, that was my reaction, but I get why they had to, because we weren't going to make any changes on our own. And these are changes that need to be made. So like, again, it gets into like that wishy-washiness where I'm like, but what are you saying? It didn't completely fix the problems I had with To Kill a Mockingbird, but I found this to be more enjoyable for me. Like,
yeah, I think even though like I still don't agree with like all her opinions and values, I do think this book was slightly clearer on some of them where they were more questionable or like more confusing in To Kill a Mockingbird because of the way they were presented. I think at the end of the day, like, because I know a lot of people will probably want to know, like, is this worth reading, that kind of thing. And I mean, I think it's worth reading in any situation where you would find reading the first draft of something to be useful. I think outside of that context, I personally would kind of be like, I don't know that this is a book that I would say everybody has to read. And if I said, what are reasons to avoid this book? I would just say, because if you want to read her completed story, this is it.
yeah.
For better or worse or whatever. And then I would also say, if you have problems with, you know, how it was published, I think you could still read it, but maybe don't put money into it. So try and find a little free library, or get it from your library or that kind of thing. But to me, this honestly feels more like a research type of book, and probably should have been somehow pitched as that. But again, probably wouldn't have been successful. So it's come down to money. And I would agree with that critique of it.
Yeah. I would say if you don't love To Kill a Mockingbird, then read this. Then it's a good story. And like, so my challenge to myself was to separate them, to treat them as two completely different books. And tonally, like it is like, I feel like this definitely is a more mature version. In the podcast I was listening to today, they said like, if this was the version that was released, would it be a classic the way To Kill a Mockingbird is? And no.
Yeah.
No, it wouldn't have that staying power. And I agree with that, even though this is the book I ended up liking more.
Yeah, I will say I did like aspects of Go Set a Watchman more, but it's interesting because we have like kind of different takes on that. Like I see them as two books, or as one book. Like I just totally view it as just like a draft and the final product. And it sounds like you kind of see them as like two separate books to consider.
Yeah, I do. I see this is the book that could have been. I think by the time you get to Kill a Mockingbird, so much has been changed. And like the focus is so different.
And I think it was worth it. I definitely think it was worth it and fleshing that out. So all right. Well, that is it for today. We have more to come. Do you know what our next book is?
The Grapes of Wrath?
Yeah. I was going to say, I know it's your pick, and I think that's right. I think it's John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath.
So we're jumping on to Summer of Steinbeck, I guess, to wrap up summer.
True.
Yeah, we're behind their reading schedule, which I think it's Pat was hosting that Summer of Steinbeck.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, there's that to look forward to. And I have never read that. So it'll be interesting for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one because while it was assigned to me in high school, I actually have never read it either.
Oh, more on that in our next episode. All right. Well, that's it for us today. So I guess I'll actually officially sign off while we're still recording, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.